Good afternoon. I would like to welcome you to today's webinar titled Telling the Forest Story. This is the first webinar in our series called Today's Northern Forest Economy. We are excited to offer this series on such an important topic that impacts communities across the Northern Forest region. I am Amy Robinson. I am the business advisor for the Northern Forest Center, and I am based out of Vermont. To begin, I realize it's midday, and I am sure that we are all coming from doing other things. So to help us be present in today's conversation, please take a moment and look around in the space that you are in and count how many wood product items you see. Wood products are embedded into our daily lives in a way that we often overlook and take for granted. It is important to recognize the great care, commitment, and investment that has been taken to bring these products to market. And every wood product has behind it a story of a forest, a supply chain, a manufacturer, and a community. When understood and told well, these stories can be a dynamic and powerful tool as a marketing strategy for wood product businesses. Sharing your forest story is a way for businesses to connect with new customers, reinforce existing relationships, and set you apart from your competition, all while educating on how the domestic wood products industry supports forest stewardship and economic strength in rural communities. Today's webinar features 3 wood product businesses that are exceptional examples. We are recording this webinar, so you'll have a resource to refer back to. I would now like to transition to Joe Short, who is the Vice President of the Northern Forest Center. Joe is the moderator for today, and Joe will introduce himself and the 3 guest panelists.
Thanks, Amy. And hi, everybody. I see folks have been joining in. You haven't missed much. We're just getting going with this webinar. So I am Joe Short. I serve as the Vice President at the Northern Forest Center and want to thank Amy for putting together this discussion and this panel today. For those who are not familiar with the center, we work as a regional innovation and investment partner with businesses and communities across the Northern Forest. Our focus is on creating rural vibrancy by connecting people with the forested landscape. And we do that in a lot of different ways, but we have a set of programs that focus specifically on the region's forest-based economy. We work to advance new markets for products and services that come from the Northern Forest in areas, for example, like mass timber, wood heat, and other emerging products. And for a number of years, we've also worked directly with primary and secondary wood products manufacturers across the region, offering them technical and financial assistance to improve their business practices, act on innovations, with the interest of keeping them as strong businesses in the Northern Forest who are both drawing wood, providing markets for wood from the Northern Forest, as well as providing good jobs in our rural communities. The focus of today's webinar, as Amy discussed, is telling the story behind forest products. We have observed in our work with a lot of secondary wood products manufacturers that sometimes they don't always have the best sense of where their raw material is coming from. And at the same time, we live in a world where a number of consumers are increasingly interested in the story behind their products. And specific to wood, they're asking questions, some good, some more challenging. So we wanted to focus on this idea of how businesses who make things from wood can connect to the story, the origin story for their raw material, and then how they're leveraging that and how they communicate with their customers and market their products. Today, we've got 3 business leaders who have been very intentional in understanding the forest story behind their products and have made that story central to how they market and talk about their products. And from their experiences, we've asked them to speak to a couple of things. First, what inspired them to look into, or in some cases, base a business on the story behind their product? What have been some of their challenges in learning, telling, and making good on that story? And how has knowing and telling the story behind their products impacted their business model and if relevant, their bottom line? So after some introductory comments from each of our guests, we'll jump into your questions and discussions. If you're here today, we assume you've got an interest in the stories behind wood products and how those can be understood and told, both to educate consumers, but we also know we have some businesses attending who may be interested in how that story can help improve their business and their sales. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, so please use that to ask your questions as we go. And I also say if folks want to say a quick hello in the chat and let us know where you are tuning in from today, that's always interesting for folks to see. So now to our speakers, we have Charlie Shackleton, who's an owner with Shackleton Thomas Furniture in Bridgewater, Vermont, and director of something called the Naked Table Project, which he will talk about. We have Mike Friedland, who owns the Lumbery in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, and Morgan Dix, who's the marketing director with Dci Furniture in Lisbon, New Hampshire. We were going to start with Charlie, but I see that he has just winked out. So I'm going to audible a little bit here and ask Mike, I know you didn't want to go first, but ask if you would be willing to while we work to get Charlie back. Oh, there's Charlie. Okay, you're saved by the bell, Mike.
Phew.
All right.
Okay. Yeah. Classic. Exactly what happened. Can you see me now?
We can, Charlie. Yes. Glad to have you back. And yeah,
I apologize. Okay.
No, we knew you had disappeared, and we're fast pivoting, but welcome back. And yeah, Charlie, I was just about, if you're game, to pass the baton to you and ask you to give your introductory comments. So take us away.
Okay, well, I'm 64 years old. I have been making things out of wood since I was about 4 years old. And I made a decision when I left our college to spend my life making things with my hands, because I wasn't an academic and I loved making things out of wood. I was told that it would be impossible to make a living making functional objects by hand. But my wife, Miranda Thomas, who is a potter, who I met at art school, we started this business making pottery and furniture. But I started making furniture as a business about 35 years ago, having come over here with Simon Pierce, the glassblower, where I basically learned about business and marketing, but as a side effect, learned how to blow glass. But when I was about 50, I am a furniture maker, and there are a lot of people who love making furniture for just the pure sake of making furniture. I was interested in a broader mission so that I could connect furniture making to the rest of the world and why it was important. And the local town, Sustainable Woodstock, or I should say Woodstock, came to me and said, have you got a project that might highlight sustainability? And I said, very simplistically, well, why not make a table from a tree? And that started 12 years ago, the Naked Table Project. And I can tell you, the Naked Table Project really is all about telling the story, planting from the seedling, not necessarily planting it because trees grow naturally here very easily, but going from the seedling tree all the way to having a dinner on the tables that we make during the day. But in the middle of the day, and I inserted this into the Naked Table as a sort of random thought to bring them out into the forest. And locally, we go to the Marsh Billings Rockefeller forest, where they have incredible foresters, and take everybody, normally amounts to 15 tables, but about 30, 40 people, for a walk in the forest. And it turned out, it's during the day, we bring a picnic, it takes about 2 hours, and it turned out to be an almost spiritual experience. At the very basic level, people walking in the woods, mixing with each other and talking. But also listening to the forester, doing demos of cutting trees down, why it's okay to cut trees down. And then after that experience, going back to the workshop and finishing the tables, and then setting out a dinner. And for some odd reason, or not odd reason, we having been in the furniture business 35 years, that first year we did the Naked Table project, we were in, I can't remember, the Boston Globe, the LA Times, Yankee Magazine. We got so much press from it. It was mind-blowing. Whereas you try getting press for making furniture and it's a whole different animal. But I believe what was so compelling about the story, I think, was that it affected ordinary people who weren't interested in making furniture. And two of the most powerful stories that came out after the first one we did, I got 2 phone calls. One was from a parent saying that their kid, who had been involved in making the table, for the first time ever wanted to lay the table and clear the table at the end of the meal. They were, and they were just so excited that they had this new table. The second phone call was from a logger who said it was an incredible experience. He said, I've never eaten off a table from a tree that I've sawn down. And that was 12 years ago, and I just remember those 2 phone calls vividly. But for some reason, and we now do this once or twice a year, we've done it, and generally what we do now is use it as a fundraiser. We are a 501c3, but we generally use it as a fundraiser to highlight some local need. Like we did it in Woodstock. We brought together 20 nonprofits who are working with people under the age of 21, and we all making tables under the same tent. We did it with Yo-Yo Ma in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where there was opioid and unemployment issues. And this year we did a fundraiser for Yes Tomorrow, the Design Build School. And next year we're planning on doing one in front of the Montpelier State House to highlight affordable housing. So we're kind of using it, we're telling the forest story, but also using it as a way of highlighting issues around it. So I guess that's probably about 10 minutes. I can go on talking.
Thank you.
Is that helpful? I can tell you why it's called Naked Table, might be useful. And that is, my wife and I disagree, but my version is that the process, unlike furniture you'll buy in the local furniture store, the process from the seedling all the way through to the table is completely exposed. And I don't need to say any more on that. My wife's version, you can choose, is that when you start with all the raw wood at the beginning of the day, it's kind of naked, and then you, during the day, you put your character into it. You clothe it with your character. So you can choose between my wife and I.
Thank you, Charlie. That's a great way to start off, and a great example of thinking creatively about connecting people with products they use from wood. So next, we're going to turn to Mike with the Lumbery to hear from him about their business and their perspective of telling the story behind the wood that they sell.
All right, thanks. My name's Mike Friedland, and I'm in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, and I am one of the owners of the Lumbery. And I just want to thank the Northern Forest Center for including myself and my business as a small part of their greater narrative. It's quite thrilling, considering I feel very small in the Great Woods, but I do think that we are very impactful. And so essentially the Lumbery is, we are a farmer's market for small wood mills scattered throughout the state of Maine. And on a very, very basic level, we take a flatbed truck, we drive to the mill, we pick up wood, and we bring it back. And you could see on the hand-drawn map over here, which is in our store, most of the mills that we work with. And then you can see our little tree down there in the south, right near Portland, Maine, where our store is. And I'd like to say that Lumbery started as a fully formed idea in my brain, but it didn't. Not at all. It started where most ideas start, out of necessity. And my background is that I've been a carpenter since '95. So for about 28 years, been working with wood, mostly in the state of Maine, actually exclusively in the state of Maine. And I owned a small construction company called Willard Square Home Repair. And we were at a point where we wanted to expand. But in order to expand, we determined that we needed to buy in bulk. And for that, I wanted to bypass the lumber yards and go straight to the sawmills in order to get the best deals. So I called the sawmills, I called the big ones around here, Hancock, Hammond, and a few others, and no one would sell to me at a relatively small scale. So then I went to Home Depot to try and find where they bought their wood from. And this was the first time in 25 years that I actually went to Home Depot and I looked to see the mill that it came from, and it was from Idaho. So for me, this was sort of that spidey sense moment where you don't know what's wrong, but you know something's wrong. And the more research you do, and we are, so I don't know if everyone knows this, but Maine is the most forested state in the lower 48. Our state tree is the pine tree, we're the pine tree state, and actually the state flower is the pine cone, which isn't even a flower. So we are so heavily focused on the woods, a large part of our economy is on the woods, yet it seemed quite odd that a good portion of the wood that was in Maine was not coming from Maine. And as it turns out, the same is true for a lot of the sawmills, even the Maine sawmills, a lot of the wood comes from Canada. So then I could go on and on, but this sends you down a rabbit hole of why aren't we buying local wood in Maine? Why is it coming in? And why aren't people doing what I'm doing, getting in a truck, driving to the mills and driving it back down? And so again, a light bulb moment went off that this was an opportunity for myself to actually buy wood in Maine pretty simply. And also to, at the same time, expose others to this, because if I didn't know about it and I've been a carpenter, then a lot of people don't know about it. So the first step was seeing if it was a viable business model, and that entailed driving around to all the mills and saying, will you sell me wood? How much will it cost? What's the quality? And will people buy it? That was first and foremost, because even though I wanted to start a business that in theory had good intent, I also wanted to start a business that made money. But in the beginning, we did heavily push the fact that we were buying from local mills. We were cutting down the chain of custody, which in turn, as everyone knows, just reduces transportation costs, and then it just keeps more, what's the word, more transparency as far as who gets the money and how people are treated, and if they're actually getting what they work for. And what we do is we go to these mills, and the owners of the mills are actually the people doing the work. So if you go to Dewey Sawmill, Dwayne Dewey's there with his Dewey shirt working the mill. If you go to Machinos and Sons, they're working the front counter. Every single mill, the mill owner works there. And so all of a sudden, I've got this connection to the product. And I guess I'm going all over the place, but then part of my goal was to try to get people to understand that they could come to my store, they could buy a higher quality product at the same price that has a connection to the state, lowers carbon emissions, supports local communities, and is just all around better. I mean, it's a pretty easy sell if you think about it. Same price, better product, lower emissions, support local communities. But the reality is about 5% of our people right now come in because of the mission. So we really push the price and the quality and customer service. And when people come in, we bombard them with the mission. If someone's here to buy a 2x4, I grab them and I say, hey, great 2x4. Can I tell you where it came from? And the story spreads. So we're about 2 years into the Lumbery. And by the way, I don't do construction anymore. I'm no more a carpenter. That business went away. The Lumbery took over, and we're gaining traction. We're getting more and more calls for people who are looking to source locally. And as it turns out, unless you go to the mill, we're their only option. So that is the long and short of it. I don't know how long that went, but I hope that gave an overview of where I came from and who we are.
That was perfect. Thank you, Mike. And for everyone who's here, I'm sure things are popping for you as you listen. So please drop any questions you've got, or even observations, comments into the Q&A. We'll be looking at those and weaving those into the conversation as we go. So let's turn to our third panelist, Morgan Dix with DCI Furniture.
Thanks, Joe. And just to start, Joe and Amy, thank you so much for inviting me in today. It's an honor to be here and to be sharing the story of our organization. And so my name is Morgan Dix, and I'm the marketing director for DCI. And I think the easiest way is just to, with respect to our company, so we are a sustainable furniture manufacturer, and we supply the military. So the armed forces make up about 2/3 of our business, and we furnish barracks and officers' quarters. And then the other third of our business is higher education. So we do universities, and our scope is global. So we do also bases all along the Pacific Rim. We do jobs in Germany and Europe. So we've got a large reach. Our employee base is about, because we have seasonal work, it ranges between 150 to 200. So that's just a little bit about the sort of scope of our business as it stands today. But in line with the mission of this webinar today, I want to tell you about our origin story. So we're a family business, and we were started by a gentleman named Henry Kober. So so Henry started the business in 1970. He was living in Manhattan. He was an academic. He was at NYU, and he was getting his PhD in philosophy. So he had done all his coursework, and now he just needed to write his dissertation. So he took his wife and his son, moved up to the White Mountains of New Hampshire, bought an old 1800s farmhouse, sort of rambling, had a barn, and he's like, the plan was, I'm gonna write my dissertation, but I need a way to make some money and support this family. And in the North Country, there's not a lot of options up there. So he had the idea, well, I'm going to make furniture. Like Charlie, he was going to make it by hand. So he set up his barn, this old barn, as his workshop, and he started to make furniture, solid wood furniture out of local trees. And he started to sell that locally, just one piece at a time. That he had some success with that, and over time it grew really slowly, and he hired a few people. And then by 1976, he had enough volume that he moved into the old Saranac glove factory in Littleton, New Hampshire. He bought that, and and the business started to grow, and the employee base started to increase. And then things really started to take off in, I think it was 1984. He was awarded the single contract for bunkable beds for the military. And over the next 15 years, built 300,000 beds for the military. So these are all solid wood bunk beds. And then also during that time, expanded into a much larger factory in Lisbon, New Hampshire, and eventually purchased a sawmill. So he purchased a sawmill in South Royalton, Vermont, which was about 75 miles from the main factory in Lisbon. And that was obviously very significant, because speaking to what Mike was talking about, suddenly he had chain of custody. We would go out into the forest, we'd choose our own trees, working with state and local foresters, and we were able to provide chain of custody. And from that point on, we started to own most of our supply chain. Obviously not some of the metal parts and that, but our core materials, we just owned our own supply chain. And we were also able to achieve FSC certification. So we became the only FSC certified sawmill in Vermont. So this, and then in the 90s, Henry's two sons joined the business, and it's continued to expand since then. Now, the thing is, a core part of our mission is sustainability. And I always like to think of it as like, it permeates almost every part of our business, but Henry, and it really comes from Henry. He's a visionary in this respect, but I don't think he ever explicitly set out to have a mission of sustainability. It was more like he's a very thrifty New Englander. And so for him, it was just sustainability just makes good business sense. If you can reuse as much as possible, you're going to save money and you're going to save resources. And that has led to a whole lot of innovation. So, for example, in our factory in New Hampshire, we don't use any oil. So we heat our factory with our own wood waste. So all the machines, we capture our own sawdust, and that heats the factories. So that's in like cold northern New Hampshire winters. We're, I think, annually displacing about 260,000 gallons of oil that we would otherwise be using to heat the factories. It powers our wood kilns, which are probably the most energy intensive part of our business. It just takes a lot of energy to create that heat. That all comes from our wood waste. Now we have these steam boilers to produce that heat. And then also our offices, we heat our offices that way. So that combination of zero waste, where we reuse all our waste, all our wood waste. So we also support local farms in the area with our excess sawdust. They use that. We sell that to the local dairy farms for bedding for the dairy cows. We use wood chips we sell it for landscaping. And we use sort of excess wood that we can't make into panels. We use that for internal components in our wood. So yeah, that gives you a basic sense of our sustainability mission. It was interesting to hear Charlie talk because there are all these different overlaps. We did this very interesting project at the Marsh Billings Rockefeller State Park as well, where we at one point, and they're one of our partners for logs and lumber. We went in there and we used draft horses to pull the trees and the logs out of the forest, because you can't, in a state park like that, you can't use motorized equipment to harvest those logs. So that was really cool. That was a cool part of the story. But as I've been involved with the organization, it's been about 6 years, there are just all these layers where I'm always learning new things from the owners about how they weave sustainability into their mission. Another cool story, we worked with Dartmouth University, and they wanted to use the trees from their own property to build all their dorm furniture. Because we're right down the road from them, that was really easy for us to harvest those trees, take them to our sawmill, and make all their furniture out of their own trees. So it's really a closed loop system there, which was really cool, very inspiring. So that gives you a sense of the origin story. There's a lot more examples to share with you, but I think we can get into it more, but all these aspects of the story have, in my time with the business, it's been a process of just layering story upon story upon story to emphasize that core sustainability mission that really started with Henry's his sensibility around all of it. And I should mention, and I only learned this recently, another part of the story, in the early 70s, some of his kind of key influences were Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, reading that book, and E.F. Schumacher's Small is Beautiful. So that, as you know, those two books are really part of the environmental canon, and they really provide a sort of bedrock of values and ethics that we are all beneficiaries of today in terms of the modern environmental movement, but also in terms of just forest stewardship and the forest products industry. So yeah, that's a little bit about us.
Thanks, Morgan. So I think we'll take the slide down now and put our whole panel up and jump into some discussion, which hopefully is the good part. So again, for the audience, please use the Q&A function if you've got questions you'd like to ask of any of our panelists. Please start to drop those in, and we'll bring them up. But I guess I'll start with a part of understanding the story behind each of your products is the sourcing and supply chain. And you all spoke in different ways to kind of how you do that, but it is sometimes tough. We observe for businesses to really understand the supply chain that, leads up to, for example, the piece of lumber coming into their shop. So my question is, I guess if each of you could speak a little bit more to how you've approached that question and task of understanding your supply chain. What are you looking for when you go to source your material, and then also how are you bringing that forward to your customers?
Want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead, Charlie. Thank you.
I like making bread, and this is not a technical answer. I just think it's the coolest thing to grind flour in the morning and make bread out of it. And even I have tried growing wheat, which is one of the most widely with rice grown crops that feeds the world in the world. And most people can't grow either. Growing the wheat, getting the grain, and making a loaf of bread. And incidentally, it takes about 3 feet by 6 feet, about 20 square feet to make a 1 pound loaf of bread in terms of crop. But I just think it's the coolest thing to know to make something out of nothing. And it's very simplistic. It's like my wife making a pot out of clay she's dug up. And that is really what has inspired the Naked Table project and making furniture and me making things or cooking things. And I think that's a fairly fundamental interest that you can definitely, even if people don't have it, and particularly if they're working in cities, they're not as connected to the land, they can be inspired by that. And I know with my customers, when they buy a table, if they know where the wood came from and you can show them the forest, I think that's really cool. And I think getting people excited and getting them to have fun around your product, and stories have always, ever since before we could write and do things like that, stories were the way that that was the original marketing. And that's how people remembered things, was by stories, because they had a continuity which you could remember. And that, anyway, that's an answer.
Yeah. And Charlie, how do you find the wood that you use to turn into your products? How do you find it?
Well, the Naked Table project is very particular, and we find all resources within 10 miles of the site. With our furniture, we go to Pennsylvania. We try to use, harvested, stuff that is regrowable materials, but we have to have the quality for our furniture to get the price that we do. But we try to make sure they're not tearing down forests, which most of the time in places like Pennsylvania, it is naturally regrowing forest. Mike can probably say more about that because he's probably in the forest more. But for fine furniture, we haven't got time to screw around with lower grade wood. Naked Table, we use everything, the knots and all, and it makes a beautiful product. It's just, anyway, that's an answer.
Thanks, Charlie. Mike or Morgan, do you want to speak to the
Sure. For
Sourcing?
for myself, as kind of a novice at doing good, on the first trips to the sawmills out of the city, I was the catchphrase or the keyword is sustainability, sustainably sourced, sustainably harvested. So I'd get to these small family wood mills and I'd say, well, where are your logs from? And they'd say, around. You know, they work with a few local loggers and they get it from local landowners. And I would push. I'd say, well, are they sustainably sourced? And they would shrug. I don't think because they didn't know or didn't care, it just didn't matter. And I actually researched that more, where I contacted logger associations, and there are logger certifications. So if you're an individual landowner, you could hire a certified logger that knows how to harvest your trees sustainably. But at the same time, the land isn't certified as sustainable. So in my head, I had to differentiate between that a sustainably harvested forest that's certified is certified, but one that's not officially certified can also be sustainably sourced and harvested as well. So it's great to have the certification, but it's also not a detriment not to have the certification. And so I shifted more of a focus to local, because you could have a sustainably harvested piece of wood that came from halfway across the planet. So just saying that this is sustainably sourced doesn't necessarily make it better than locally sourced that isn't certified, if that makes sense. So I shifted from my catchphrase early on of really wanting to push sustainably harvested products to really wanting to push locally sourced products, and in turn promote the mills and the workers of the mills and the proximity of the mills and who owns the mills. And if you come to our store, we've got a dozen posters of every mill that we work with. And it says logs harvested within a 40-mile radius of mills. Because in general, that was our response. So I know that they come from within a close proximity. And my assumption, which may or may not be true, is that these individual small landowners, it's in their best interest to preserve their own land. So even though I don't know for sure that the wood that the logs that they're getting are sustainably harvested, I could almost guarantee that it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So Morgan, you all, as you said, control a bit of your own supply chain, but so how do you sort of do this work of tracing back?
Well, so we have a wood expert on staff who works with local state foresters. Most of our wood comes from northern Vermont. Some of it comes from northern New Hampshire as well. But I think the key point for us is that as an FSC certified chain of custody company, we're obliged to audit the sources of the wood. I can't really speak in detail about what that means. I'm not the wood expert, but I do know that there are certain standards related to the wood that that the audited landowners have to meet. So I think we do an audit every 2 years or every 3 years, and we have to demonstrate that the sources are sustainable. So yeah, that's really so that's one part of the answer. The other part is, so when we go out, we do these sort of small patch cuts, and we get something called a treatment from the forester. So we work with a forester and they provide a treatment for us. So before we do the cut, they do a full sort of ecological survey, like what's going to be the impact of this cut, right? If it's a 1 acre little patch cut. And then we work with them in terms of like, how do you create how is that going to be ideal for the forest? How are you going to, with this cut, how are you going to create additional habitat for endangered species or just the species that live around there? So, we have to go through that process and do a treatment with a forester every time we go out and cut trees. So, and the ideal is to definitely leave it better than we found it, so that you're creating a multi-stage forest that is not all just a climax forest, but that, you know, you have young, middle, and mature age trees.
So Morgan, do you know what it was that drove DCI to pursue FSC certification initially? Was it something customers were asking for, or did it align with kind of business values, or?
I think
Do you-
both.
Yeah.
So I like the University of California is a big customer of ours. So we have a contract with them. They have really high standards with their furniture, and the FSC was one of their minimum standards for the wood furniture. So that, I don't know which came first, whether it was the University of California demand or Henry and Amos and David saying, hey, this is actually really good for and important for our brand to get this certification, because obviously it's a big marketing point for us. And, you know, ultimately that would, I think, come under the marketing budget, that kind of certification. They, you know, and they're expensive. Like certifications, I think the longer I've kind of participated in this, I do think there's a certain barrier to entry to the smaller businesses that I don't like. As a long-term environmentalist, that's not something that I'm a fan of. I do think certifications in general are too expensive.
Yeah, and if we could just stick on this for a second, yeah, because it sounded like, Mike, you would run into, you know, sort of, there are longer certification structures as well. But yeah, picking up on your point, Morgan, I mean, I think I've often seen that certification, as you said, is sometimes like a requirement for entry for certain markets. And so that can make it worth doing for certain types of businesses. But I also tend to hear that certified products don't necessarily command a price premium. So I'm just sort of curious to Morgan and maybe Mike and Charlie as well, if you could just reflect a little bit on that dynamic of certification and and how it benefits the business, or if it's just something you feel like you need to do to be able to access certain client bases.
Right. The sense that I've gotten is that having a sustainably certified product doesn't bring in more money than a non-sustainably certified product. I was at a wood mill early on. They made wood flooring, and they said that they worked for FSC certification, and they really pushed the product with giant labeling, sustainably sourced, harvested wood flooring, and it didn't move. The contractors went with the least expensive flooring, because most of the times it's not the homeowner going to the wood store. The homeowner basically says, I want wood flooring, and the contractor goes through the path of least resistance, which generally is something that's not certified. And a solution to this would have homeowners and home builders be more involved with every step of the way, and they tell the contractor, no, this is what we want. We want local, we want sustainably certified. But at this point in my store, I'm getting mostly contractors. And I actually made a push. I made appointments with architects throughout Portland to try and say, hey, I know you're making this home energy efficient. Can you also make it locally sourced, or have a portion of it be locally sourced? And the thing is, they do the designs, but then they give the design to the builder.
Right.
And so they don't really push the sustainability factor or the locally sourced factor. They just say, here's our design, now you price it out. So there's a big disconnect. And I think if there were financial incentives, more people would be certified. But at this point, I don't see it.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please, Charlie.
Can you hear me? It says you can hear me.
Yes. Yeah.
So our customers, this may sound weird, but our customers, we never get asked, is this a sustainable resource? And I think the reason is that they assume wood is sustainably grown. They just think wood is a natural product, just like clay. But the big hot area, and I'm a member of the Vermont Guild of Furniture, the biggest tricky area is tropical hardwoods. And that is the big no-no, cutting down tropical forests. And we have a lot of experience for this because we make garden benches for the Chicago Botanic Garden, and teak is a huge issue because it's the ultimate outdoor wood. And it is sustainably grown in certain places, and unlike mahogany, grows very well in plantations. And it's phenomenal. It is the best outdoor wood. We have experimented with locust, and it's like a nightmare. It's incredibly hard. It's like a weed tree. I don't know whether, Mike, you've come across locust.
We've tried to, and mills are having a hard time making anything with it, and we have a hard time storing it.
We made 50 garden benches out of substantial garden benches out of locust, and we nearly all went mad in the process for various reasons. But they say it lasts 1 year longer than stone in terms of being, durable. So we were certified at one point. The tracking everything, they really just need to know where are you getting it, and you got to buy from a set. We used to buy from Collinswood. The whole thing was a nightmare. I ended up with some conversations with Thomas Moser, who does not, at least at that time, did not use FSC supplied wood because he said it was more difficult, harder to get. The customer didn't care. Plus, most of the time, if you're buying like Vermont wood or Pennsylvania wood, it is reseeding automatically, and the people who are selling it are making sure there's more coming on. I mean, that may be a story, but I believe it. On the tropical front, I don't believe it. It's terrible. So yeah, the FSC, we gave it up. And as my first point, customers think wood is a natural product, so they don't really go any further than that. And they definitely wouldn't pay more money to have sustainably grown cherry versus cherry from the Appalachians.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, Morgan.
Well, I was going to say, I think for us, there's two sides to it. Like, so as I mentioned, 2/3 of our business is the military. They definitely don't care. For that, there's no incentive there for us to have FSC certified. That is a race to the bottom in terms of price. So we're just competing on price. The other third of the business, it's like the other extreme. You have some like the University of California. I think if they didn't have that mandate in place, I'm not sure we would maintain the certification. But that's their minimum. They really want cradle to cradle, BIFMA. They want really the highest standards. But they want B Corp. They want us to be a B Corp, and I've pursued this with Henry, but it's just, there's not really a mandate there for us to do that from our customer base. And because it's what they want and not what they require, we don't do it just because it's expensive. Like, to re-up every year, you're looking at, depending on the certification, minimum $5,000, but more often like 15, 20, 25 grand to keep that certification going. And it's just a big expense. And yeah, so the incentive isn't totally there for us, but we maintain it because it is a core part of our brand story. And the universities, I think more universities are going in that direction, the UC direction. And, we've seen some schools just come right out of the gate saying, we chose you because of your sustainability mission and you have the FSC. So there are a few schools that's just, it sells them. Not the majority, but I think the trend, though, in higher education is going to go in that direction.
Yeah. So that question of whether certification really helps your business sounds very unique to the business and the context and the clients that you're all trying to reach. We've got a question, an anonymous one in the chat. Someone wondering, are there any tree species that are becoming difficult to obtain for any of you? And if yes, why do you think that is? And I know, Morgan, you guys at one point made a lot of things from ash, which is challenge.
Right.
But
right. Well, really, actually, we do, some of our work is plywood, and the big source of hardwood plywood is Baltic birch, and of course that comes from Russia. So that's gotten nearly impossible to get. So Henry's come up with a whole way of sort of creating an alternative with, again, using our waste wood, creating molds, and sort of, yeah, he's found a workaround to create something that, like, I can't explain it. I'm the marketer, I'm not the, but
Understood.
but yeah, that has been a challenge. I think we're starting to deal with that. But the ash, I don't think so. Our core woods are ash, maple, and oak, and I think we still have plentiful supply of all of those.
Yeah, I'm wondering if she's asking about species or about inventory. Because for us, we're having a hard time getting, I know there's plenty of cedar trees, but just keeping up with demand for one of our big products is white cedar, and we're pretty much the only retail store around that sells white cedar. And when we first opened 2 years ago, there was about a 2 to 3 week turnaround for large orders. And now it's about 8 months. And I think we all realize it's because of all the economic factors going around the world with COVID and working from home and staffing shortages. But cedar has been in high demand and hard to get for us.
Thanks. Charlie, how about, or sorry, Morgan, go ahead.
No, I'll go after Charlie.
I don't think we have, but we mostly deal with the Native American species, walnut, cherry, and maple, and we have not, and also the prices have remained pretty stable. But we don't buy a ton of wood. It's a very particular niche market, so no, we have not had any issues. Touch wood. Don't want it to happen.
I was going to say, and this dovetails a little with Mike's point, in terms of like supply chain in general, it's been helpful to contrast sort of the headlines all about the challenges with the global supply chain, and so many people struggling with that. A lot of our competitors use rubber wood, for example, and that most of that's coming from China, Malaysia, some from South America. The fact that we've been able to tell a different story and really emphasize that in relationship to all the headlines, like, hey, this is a big issue, it's a big issue, in the New York Times, there's this constant like supply chains, the bell kept ringing it. So that gave us an opportunity to emphasize for us, hey, our supply chains, it's almost all local and we are not struggling. And so there's a certain security that we could convey to our customers, who some of whom were ordering like a year out because they were panicking about the wood supply. And that has been a real benefit in terms of just trend jacking, really using the topical nature of the supply chain issue and emphasizing one of our core strengths.
Charlie, you alluded to, I think this is an allusion to something we see, which is that sometimes, what customers are asking for may not align with, either the local supply chain or a sustainable supply chain. And you use the example of tropical hardwoods. I'm sure you can speak to this, but we know walnut is treasured for furniture and is something consumers looking for. It's not a species that we grow a lot of in the northern forests. Mike, I'm curious if you have customers coming in, looking for something that doesn't grow in Maine, and have to talk to them about that. So the question there is, have you seen opportunity and had any luck in your involvement or in discussions with customers like Morgan and sort of shifting their perspective and what they're asking for through your education as to, well, we have this material, comes from here. Has that made a difference?
Who's that, Mike? Do you want to do that one?
Yeah, I could speak very loudly to this, that for as many years I was in carpentry, we'd do a deck and we'd order cedar from the lumber yard and it would arrive as red cedar. And I had no clue, A, that there was multiple species of cedar, or B, where it came from. And once I opened the store, I realized that red cedar came from the West Coast, even though there's tons of white cedar in Maine. So there's this very strange dystopian thing going on where the simplest thing would be to drive the mill and bring it back here. Yet somehow there's this great algorithm going on that makes it easier to bring wood from the West Coast to Maine than just a few hundred miles away. So people call the store asking for red cedar, or they stop in, and it's an opportunity to educate them and say, do you know where red cedar comes from? Do you know we have tons of white cedar here? I could get it for you. And I have shifted a lot of people, and white cedar at this point is our biggest seller. For some reason, the large lumber yards don't carry white cedar. The box stores don't carry white cedar. It's either the little family mills or my store. So right now we're using that as an education piece, but also as a difference maker to say, here we are, here's why you should buy local. Our products are unique and special.
So we have to replace it. We have a cedar shingle roof, and we've got to replace the cedar shingles on it. And we got a quote 2 years ago. We did some of it, and I think it was about $300 a square, which is about 100 square feet. $300 a square for red cedar. Now I went into the store, lumber store last week, and it's $1,600 a square.
Yeah, you can't get it.
So, and then the roofer I was talking to said, well, we said, well, what about white cedar? He said, I won't put it on your roof because red cedar is way more durable. So I guess I'm being selfish and asking, trying to get some information here on the longativity of white and red cedar, because that might.
Yeah, I actually wrote an article about that. And white cedar actually lasts longer than red cedar. The main difference is structurally. So if you're building support beams, you may want to use red cedar. And also red cedars are bigger trees, so you get wider boards with clearer knots, with less knots. But overuse, white cedar lasts longer than red cedar.
Okay, I'm gonna have to do some research, because they are always recommending red cedar shingles for roofs and not white cedar.
Oh no, there are a few white cedar mills in Maine that make fantastic products with just.
I'm not fussy, I just don't want to have to redo the roof.
I'm surprised you didn't want to make a shingle out of black locust, Charlie. But
I didn't think of that. It would be horrible given all the knot.
Morgan, did you want to comment on the last question?
Yeah, I don't think we really get a demand for, if I understand the question, for wood sources other than what we already offer. You know, the people really love the hardwood furniture. Yeah. So being able to provide maple, oak, and ash is already a kind of premium standard in a way. And we'd be able to we're not, you know, we're a contract manufacturer. But if we were to sell the same products on a consumer market, we could probably sell it for 4 times what we sell it to the military and higher education markets. Oh, easily. I mean, it's just it's beautiful solid wood furniture that you're selling a beautiful table for $300 to a university that, with our sustainability credentials, if we sold that, you know, we'd easily be able to compete with the West Elms and, you know, the premium sort of sustainable companies. I've looked and I've done competitive analysis. None of them actually have the sustainability credentials that we do. We're just completely not set up to service consumers. I've tried to make the argument to Henry. I was like, hey, this is an amazing opportunity in terms of the profit margins we can make, but it would be a huge shift for us. That was kind of a roundabout answer, Joe. Sorry.
No, good, understood. And want to note there's some good. Sean had a point in the chat. This is back on certification about starting to see some larger custom manufacturing clients looking for that. And Morgan, your response, which I'm not sure went to everybody, but just you're seeing that you know, as well as customers do become more attuned to this, which again is part of the reason we thought it was worthy of this discussion. My next question is, so forests and forestry are really complex. I think that's been very evident, you know, as you all have discussed your products and supply chains. So my question is, how have you effectively communicated that to that complexity? Have you boiled that down for your customers? And I guess ask you to be as specific as you can in terms of, are you doing that through conversation, through your website, through videos, print collateral? What have been the effective tools you've found for really translating these complex stories into the bits and pieces that your customers can digest? Morgan, go for it.
I'm happy to speak to that. Well, I think picking up on Charlie's earlier point about the power of storytelling, I'm a marketer, and my whole thing is teaching sales, right? If you're able to share information with people in an authentic way and teach them about what you're doing, particularly through storytelling, right out of the gates, you have an advantage. You're just trying to share with them what you're doing and trying to convey that as authentically as possible. So I think what I've learned is there's no detail that's too small to share with our customers. And the primary way that we communicate that is through our blog. Similar to Mike, we just do a lot of blogging. I write ebooks on like our manufacturing process. We do brand videos, but I think over time it's gone from very broad, like why wood, just why is wood sustainable? Because, there's still in a lot of people's minds, like the 90s timber wars sort of relationship to wood products and like the environmental wars around that, to like educating the audience on like why it is fundamentally a renewable resource, especially in the northern forest, where growing trees outpaces cutting by 2 to 1, right? So that there's just it's inherently a renewable resource. But I guess the point is the storytelling has gotten more and more granular over time. And one example of that is like we have different audiences. So sometimes we're speaking to the architectural junior designer who's been tasked to go and get information on the product. So we need really good graphics for her. And then we're speaking to the facilities management folks. That's another one of the stakeholders that we have to speak to. We started like a campaign called the Nuts and Bolts, which was just articles on more granular stuff like joinery, why we do these joints, and why these are like why finger joints are more sustainable and use more of the wood in certain instances. Like that would be an example of just getting really granular. But that's like when I'm speaking to the facilities manager, that's what they want to know. Like, and why is a wood deck panel better than a metal spring deck? Going into like particulars around all of this, it's just no detail is too small. And I feel like that's something I've learned. And the more you understand also your customer, and you can kind of understand what their concerns are and what their key questions are, and then just get content out to them, particularly for us through the blog, and then an a regular email newsletter. That's how we do it.
Yeah, I find that the big problem for us is that, one, we try and create brand loyalty with, to piggyback on what Morgan said, is that we do that through images, through storytelling, through newsletters and webinars and Instagram. But lumber is one of the few products that is nameless. Like everything else has a name. It could be beans, it could be cars, airlines. Everything has a name to it that creates images and customer loyalty and stories. And your grandfather had a Jeep, and so you're going to get a Jeep. But wood, there's no name on it.
Right.
And so you can't. There's no connection. There's no loyalty. There's no repetition. You can't say, "Wow, I really love that siding." Siding may be different, but I really love that decking. I want to get this decking again. And you can't get the same mill and the same people. So what we try and do is when we sell a product, when we sell siding, nickel gap siding, we say, this is from Yoder's. So that when a piece rots out, they could say, we want more of that siding from Yoder's. Or they could say, we didn't like that product from Yoder's, what other mill? So putting a face and a name and a story to a product really creates a connection and really creates repetition and repeat customers. And it's nice to be able to ask for something for name and by name. And the box stores have done a great job of not labeling. And it's just wood.
Right.
And I mean, my goal is, if I do my job right, is that all of a sudden there is a section at Home Depot that's for local wood instead of organic at the grocery store. It's, you could choose wood from here that came from this mill, or you could choose wood from there. We have no idea where it came from. And in general, customers like to have that connection. They, down on a basic level, they like to know where their products came from.
Yeah.
They like to know that good things happen along the way and that their money is going to the people that need it the most, that deserve it the most. But right now there's none of that. And so we really push the story and the people.
Charlie.
Well, obviously the naked table is one of our ways of telling the story, and that's really worked. And I think one of the reasons it's really worked is it came from our hearts. It was a very honest look. It wasn't intentionally a marketing project. But that having been said, I don't know who's listening to this, but I know marketing is a huge piece of running every business. And I have got, everyone's talking about Facebook and Instagram. I don't know what else there is. I don't think it really works. I think it's, a sort of background noise, which might be entertaining. What does work for us is emails to our customers. But in order for the emails to work, they have to be compelling. And our last email, we were trying to sell a coffee table which had tiles that were decorated by my wife. So it was a mixture of the two of us. So what we did, and it was about to go into the showroom, and I said, okay, let's tell the story of this coffee table. And so we had written word, we had photos, and we had videos. We had my wife describing how she did the decoration. We had the maker with a bio and telling her story. Anyway, we turned it into a story. We sold the thing within 2 days. And I think it's because we managed to turn it into a story. Anyway, I think, I'm thinking about the lumber business and you saying that, it has no name, but there are stories, and it made me grab from my bag, which I want to write a naked table project book, but I want to base it on this book, which I'm going to show you the cover of, which I think is a wonderful book about sawmills. And what's really wonderful is it's designed for kids. And this is the book. I don't know, is that coming out backwards to you?
No, it's perfect.
Yeah. Does anyone know this book? It's the most beautiful, simple book. It's just photos and a story. It's basically for kids about a visit to the sawmill. But I don't know a guy out there who isn't just completely fascinated by knuckle boom loaders, but there are ways of getting around, the nameless wood story by getting out into the forest. Loggers, you can't get a word out of them when they're out in the forest, and then you get them at a bar and they don't shut up. It's like we've noticed at the naked table because we invite them to the table. So there are a lot of stories out there in the forest with people who are infatuated. And nowadays, the whole thing about trees communicating with each other through the fungal hi-fi and all that stuff, and there's incredible books about it. It's in the news.
So,
a couple of comments on storytelling.
Yeah. So, Charlie, you I think we're saying social media you don't feel has done much for you, but Mike, you mentioned Instagram. So I'm curious if you or Morgan, if you specific to this topic of telling stories about wood products, how you've effectively used social media channels or similarly found them to be not super helpful.
Well, we do a newsletter on Instagram, and it's probably 5 posts that just tell stories, not trying to sell anything. And then the 6th post will say sale on sale on pine. But we really work, and the same with Instagram. We do the same. We'll post pictures of the mills. We'll post pictures of us just doing something at the store, and then every once in a while they'll say sale on this, or come get this, or new delivery of this. And so we spend a lot of time just working up interest, not for the sake of saving money, but for the sake of who we are and what we do.
Yeah, I resonate with that, Mike. I would say the majority of how we project ourselves into the different media spaces is, it's really not about our products, it's about our brand story. And I don't know if we've ever sent an email about our product, because we have and that, again, that's particular to us. We have a very long sales cycle. It's like 6 to 8 months. So it's not like sending out an email about a new product line. It's not really doesn't do a lot for us, because they go through a really long process. We have beautiful collateral on our website that shows the furniture, and that's usually where people are doing their due diligence and their research, and they want to do that on their own terms. Really what our projection is like, again, it's just telling to use Mike's term, which I really like, is just so much of this is about connection. And we want people to connect to our company. So we will tell stories like the North Country, as everyone knows, ground zero for the opioid epidemic. And we joined this initiative, the government's initiative, to become a recovery friendly workplace. And, we had to go through all these steps in New Hampshire to do that. And we just told the story about the genesis of that. Like, that there was a woman who, she was struggling with substance misuse, who was coming into our HR director, lost custody of her child, and had to go through all the, a pretty intensive process of counseling and whatnot. But we were able to support her through the process, because we also had, through this program, a therapist on staff who could work with people struggling with this, who came in once or twice a week. And it had nothing to do with wood products. It had to do with just the human story and people being able to connect with that. And it's part of our company character to do that. And it's important. I feel like it helps people just connect to us as not a faceless organization, but this is just real people and struggling with real people's struggles, right? All of us. And then the other part I wanted to speak to is I loved what Mike said about storytelling sort of interrupts the whole sort of Amazon consciousness of stick something into a cart, press a button, and it shows up on your doorstep, which is the analog of going to Home Depot and it's just all lumber, right? There's no real connection to the source. And I feel like these stories, they help interrupt this whole momentum of disconnection that we're in right now. It's a huge cultural thing. And the storytelling, I feel it's really powerful to just interrupt and connect. And I think connection on so many levels is the answer. Obviously, Charlie's whole project is around getting around the table and connecting. And, I think that people really respond to that.
I know we sometimes hear it can be a challenge, particularly in small businesses where there's so much going on, to find the time to devote to, writing those email newsletters, the blog, even doing the social media. So I'm curious how do each of your businesses handle that? Are you all the ones doing that, or do you have dedicated folks on staff who are really focused on communications?
Well, I was an English major who always wanted to write a book but can't write a book. So I love writing the newsletters, and people come into the store and just rave. They said, I don't want to buy anything. I just love your newsletter.
And you're like, that's great. And please buy something too.
Yeah, but I enjoy it so much. And I think my passion for what I do comes through. I feel like I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in an apartment building. So I feel like the biggest fish out of water heading to northern Maine and going to these sawmills, and I feel like my eyes are like the eyes of just complete naivety, not knowing the terminology, not knowing what they do or how things work, and just being in complete awe, like a newborn, at seeing how it all works, and then putting that in my newsletter. I just take great joy in the newsletter. So, and then we also have other people on staff that work with Instagram and Facebook and other things like that. But yeah, I put my English degree to use.
Awesome. Morgan and Charlie, how about you all?
I think the most powerful form of marketing is word of mouth. And I'm listening to Mike here, there was a marketing book. These marketing books, mostly they say you can read the back cover and you've read it all. But this one actually was on the front cover and it says marketing, I think it was 1 by 1 or something like that. And so when we get, and that was really all I needed to, I didn't need to buy the book after that, but it was when people come into our store, and I'm sure it sounds like with Mike's store as well, I don't know about Morgan's, we make sure they have a good time and we are passionate about what we do and they remember it. And it's almost like they might or might not buy something. I very often give them a list of all the other furniture places and tell them, go educate yourself, because I'm kind of fascinated myself what they end up buying. But some of them end up buying just because they want to remember the story. A lot of them are working in offices in New York City. They can't live the life of a woodworker in Vermont or whatever. But the one thing they can do is take a piece of the life of the woodworker in Vermont back to their city apartment. So it's almost like we view our things as souvenirs as much as functional objects. But yeah, that it's taken us 35 years. It takes a long time to talk to a lot of people, but that I spend a lot of time talking to people, as you can probably tell. But I also think that I used to hate going to dinner parties and those sort of events because I got bored. But I've realized that you can really get people to listen by asking questions and asking the really tough questions. And people have are incredibly versatile. Like, the dinner party conversation where you think you can't change track. I've discovered that you can ask someone a completely blunt question completely in the middle of another conversation and they completely go with it. And when customers, I learn so much from customers just by some random thought that comes to my head. It's like, where did you buy that walking stick? Or I don't know what it is, but it engages them. Anyway, it's a long story, but asking the rough questions is really important to find out why are they in your store? What are they doing? What do they know about red and white cedar, or I don't know, whatever.
Yeah. Morgan, how about at DCI? Do you all have a communications shop, or are we looking at it?
You're looking at it. Yeah. Similar to Mike, I'm an English major, and I got started in this whole thing through writing. And the beauty is Google really responds to writing, and so I do a lot of organic SEO work, and so through the articles over time, we build up which is a portfolio of articles that are authoritative and that land on the first page of Google search results related to terms relevant to our business. And
interesting.
Yeah, I feel like that's just a steady drip over the years. You just kind of think through what are sort of core questions that our customers ask us, and then write to that, and then more recently specific targeted terms like college dorm desk hutch, that's got 1,000 monthly visitors and almost no competition. So how can I create an article that speaks to that? And but yeah, I do all of it.
Yeah, no, it is kind of fascinating and a little frightening how, that sort of paid search, can allow you to have a bit of an ongoing relationship with certain customers.
Oh, yeah.
Another program of the center is a regional wood heat marketing campaign, Feel Good Heat. And I'm learning about retargeting and, but that notion of someone expresses an interest in something and you have the ability to follow them across, not just follow them, that's kind of the creepy part, but actually, continue to engage them with content. And that does feel important when trying to tell, as we've talked about, a sort of bigger picture, more complicated story. I'm going to start to wind us down. Yeah. And
one last thing, Joe, I would say I differ a little bit from Charlie in relationship to the earned media or like the press, because we have had good success with some of our kind of internal victories. Just I didn't really have much experience with PR before DCI, but I started to send out press releases more often, and then seeing those get picked up by sort of trade association online periodicals like Furniture Today and Woodworking Network and stuff, getting profiled in there, that started to become we started to have more success with that. And I wouldn't write it off. I think it's worth celebrate. Just sometimes you don't get any bites, but sometimes you do.
Just to be clear,
yeah,
I was dissing Facebook and Instagram.
Oh, right. Okay.
No, I'm a total press hound.
Okay, press hound. Good.
I said, naked table, we got picked up all over the place. No, it's fair. And there is a use. I don't, because obviously Mike's having the success with it. I talked to furniture makers having huge success. We just haven't had any success with Instagram and Facebook, but there's a lot of talk about it.
Yeah, I think it creates it with the PR. It kind of creates a halo effect, which just kind of lifts all the boats, right? You just, when you start to get that higher profile, it's just like it creates all these collateral benefits. Some of them you don't realize right away, but for your brand, it's excellent.
I have, Joe, if there's a spare moment, I've got two questions that I'm trying to.
Great. Yeah. I'm just going to say to our audience, this is last call for your questions. And then I wanted to ask you all if you had any questions for each other before we start to wind down here. Charlie, go ahead.
Okay, I've got two. You can choose. My first one is, I like sitting in Adirondack chairs, okay? And I go past the hardware store, and nowadays you can only buy plastic Adirondack chairs. What am I going to do? I think plastic comes from oil, so it's probably a no-no. I'm not quite sure where plastic comes from, but I think it's oil-based. And wood chairs, I made a teak copy of an amazing one I bought, and it'll probably last to my great-grandchildren. But the other ones were white cedar and pine from Home Depot. I've tried everything. And they rot away after a while. So that's my first stinking question is like, do I succumb buy the cheap plastic one, or do I buy an expensive wooden one? My other one is it okay to burn wood? Anyway, you can choose.
Goodness, Charlie.
What do you want to do?
What was the second one?
Is it okay to burn wood?
So I'm going to make a shameless plug and also punt on that the next webinar the center has teed up is on the wood heating sector, and that's in October. So I'm going to punt that one because it's a great question and also a loaded one, and maybe touch on the Adirondack chairs. No, I think it's interesting. I know we have in our audience is someone from Timber HP, which is a company starting up over in Maine. They're going to make a wood fiber insulation product to replace
I've heard of that.
fiberglass.
Incredible company. Yeah.
And
Yes.
I guess, at the center, I think we certainly feel that there is opportunity in that sort of responsible substitution narrative of, we now make a lot of things from oil and plastic that once upon a time we made from wood. And there is an opportunity here potentially to go back to the future. But as Mike, I know you've acknowledged that the values case only goes so far against price. So I think that is a question, that makes yours tricky, Charlie, because certainly on a values basis, there's a case to be made for the traditional Adirondack chair. But on a cost basis, at least my personal experience looking at those price tags is that, they're not even in the same ballpark. So I think that is a challenge. And I think it suggests focusing. I mean, you talked, Mike, about you're able to provide the, same price So I think focusing potentially in some of those areas where there is the ability to at least come closer on price.
Yeah,
seems to be-
we do make some basic products at our store, but I've come up with a general rule, which is we only make rectangles, which are
Not Adirondack chairs.
a lot easier to make, because my business partners, they were saying Adirondack chairs, and then we built one and it took forever. They're very hard to replicate at scale. And so now we make crates and garden beds and outdoor showers, anything where there's a box, a square, rectangle, we excel at. Adirondack chairs, not cost effective.
Yeah. By the way, on the burn wood thing, we at the last Naked Table project in Warren, Vermont, 2 weeks ago, I asked that question of the forester out in the wood. And one of the audience was very well educated in the thing. And he said, yeah, you know, burning wood obviously puts carbon into the atmosphere. But he said the alternative is oil. The biggest, and I thought this is the best answer I've heard, not to undermine any things you've got coming up. But the thing about oil is it's taken out of the middle of the earth and is irreplaceable. Whereas the wood is replaceable, but also the carbon can be taken. I'm using wrong references here. Can be taken back in. It is part of a cycle.
Part of the biological cycle. Yeah, and Morgan, maybe it both as any sort of closing comment, maybe you want to touch on, because you talked about your energy story and how that's part of what, you know, part of the story you tell, I think, is you're not using oil, you're using wood waste.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also my understanding is with burning wood, you're not adding any net new carbon into the atmosphere. It's part of that natural carbon cycle, one way or another, whether it's through burning or biodegrading, you're going to get that release of carbon back into the atmosphere. But yeah, I think, again, just on the storytelling thing, I would just say for us, you know, recently we got these grants from the Forest Service, USDA, and New Hampshire Energy Fund to upgrade our boilers to higher efficiency boilers. And that's going to allow us, in addition to producing more heat much more efficiently, because our current steam boilers are like 40 years old, that it will also allow us to potentially start generating our own electricity, which is very much one of our goals. And just, again, drawing down our dependence on the grid. And that again, is just, it's adding another layer to our brand story. And yeah.
Excellent. Well, we are coming up on 1:30 here, so I'm going to move to wrap us up. Thank you all so much for taking the time to be part of this conversation, and thanks to our virtual audience for joining. I'm going to consult my notes here for things I need to be sure to cover, and I think we want to thank, as the center, we're supported by a couple of federal agencies, the Northern Border Regional Commission and the U.S. Economic Development Administration, and some of our forest economy work. So I want to acknowledge and thank them for that support. And I think building on this, you know, on the focus of today's discussion, Amy Robinson, our staff member here at the center, who works directly with wood products businesses, is going to be starting a workshop series later this fall, specifically for businesses who want to dive more into the work of understanding the story behind your products, and then incorporating that into your communications and marketing materials. So this is going to get pretty granular through a series of workshops, and also connect participating businesses with some one-on-one communications consulting to help them put into practice what they've learned. So that'll be starting, we expect, next month. And as you can see on the screen here, please contact Amy for any questions or if you're interested in that. After today, you'll get a link with an evaluation survey, as well as the link to the recording for this webinar and links to future ones. So please, as we start this series, we'd love your feedback on what worked for you and maybe topics you're interested in for future discussions. And as I noted, our next one will be on October 19th. with a discussion of a number of folks who work in the wood heating business about what they're seeing as we tip into heating season here. So again, Morgan, Mike, Charlie, thank you so much. Amy, thank you for your organizing today. And again, thanks to our audience. And please
Joe.
go and be well in the Northern Forest.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks,
Thank
Joe.
you
Thanks,
very
Amy.
much for inviting us.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.